Arkham International Season 1 Shadow of the Drowned City by Josh Reynolds. Narrated by Todd Menesses. Chapter 1 Paris. Trish Scarborough sighed and sat back in her chair. The smoky air of the cafe thrummed with sound. Music and voices mingled in a tidal pulse that did little for her burgeoning headache. Paris was loud these days, even in its quieter corners. The City of Lights had become a city of noise, and she longed for the quiet of Venice. She took a sip of her espresso, wishing it were something stronger. She tapped her cigarette onto the side of the saucer and took a steadying pull. The last few days had been stressful. She'd only just gotten back from a fact-finding expedition to a nasty little patch of Hungarian soil called Strigoi Kavar. The Bolsheviks were interested in it as well, something to do with files purloined from the Germans. From what she'd seen, there wasn't much there, unless one was keen on bad feelings and worse memories. Trish, who had more than enough of both, had gotten out of Hungary one step ahead of the Russians. The Bolsheviks had somehow gotten her description, and they were still carrying a grudge after that misunderstanding in Trieste. She wasn't overly worried about it. They had bigger things to worry about at the moment. Everyone did. Something was happening out of sight in the dark corners of the world. Every intelligence agency in the Western Hemisphere was on high alert, but didn't know why. They could all feel it, like a tremor shivering through a fault line. But she figured she was the only one who had a good idea of what was causing it all, and that scared her. Trish had always been good at puzzles. She saw patterns the way other people saw colors. Sometimes, however, those patterns were just pieces of a larger whole. Her duty, as bestowed upon her by Director Yardley, the Cipher Bureau, and the government of the United States of America, was to tease out the edges of the big picture. Only that picture was getting uglier and more uncertain by the day. Word was, Yardley was on the way out. Someone new, no word who, was coming in. But whoever they were, they'd already started sticking their oar in where it wasn't needed. A number of agents, Trish included, had been quietly encouraged to join Yardley in retirement. But leaving the game before it was finished had never appealed to her. Another sip of espresso, another drag on her cigarette. Her eyes rested on the door. Her contact was late, which meant she was late making her report to control. Somewhere in the city, the Paris office was probably getting even more antsy than they already were. Everyone was on edge after Massachusetts, after Arkham. Not that she knew what had happened in Arkham exactly. No one else seemed to know either, but it had all sorts of very strange people feeling very nervous. And that, in turn, made her edgy. Her instincts were screaming at her to run, but not in any particular direction other than away. Since that wasn't particularly helpful, she decided to do what she did best, and find the pattern in the chaos. "Scarborough, you look tired. Busy day?" Trish looked up. A narrow, sallow-faced American in a slick suit stood beside her table, grinning down at her. Chauncey Swan wasn't anyone's idea of handsome, except maybe his own. "You're late, Chauncey." "I wasn't aware I was on a schedule," Swan said, as he doffed his straw boater and dropped it on the table. He snapped his fingers in the general direction of a waiter, eliciting a nasty look that he blithely ignored as he ordered coffee in his atrocious French. For a man as ostensibly well-traveled as he was, Swan wasn't much for languages. "What do you want, Scarborough? I'm a busy man." "And how is business, Chauncey? Because you're looking a bit threadbare to me. Shiny patches on your elbows, and that stupid boater is starting to fray. Rough times?" "I am currently between opportunities," Swan said stiffly. He called himself an acquisitionist, which was a fancy word for thief. Until recently, he'd been employed by Carl Sanford and the Silver Twilight Lodge. Sanford had paid Chauncey to filch esoteric bric-a-brac when he wasn't playing bagman. "Consider this one, then." Trish patted the envelope. "Enough money to keep you in croissants and wine for at least a month." Chauncey, she knew, liked the high life. It was why he'd gone to work for Sanford in the first place. Swan eyed the envelope warily, as if expecting a trick. "I don't like croissants." "So buy whatever pastry suits you." "And what service must I perform in return for such largesse?" "I need information." "On?" "Tell me about Arkham," Trish said. "Not much to tell. I haven't been back since Sanford. Well, you know." Swan scratched his chin and let his gaze dart about the cafe. He was nervous. Trish wondered why. Chauncey wasn't the sort to suffer from anxiety, not unless he had a good reason. He licked his lips and looked back at her. "I'm a free agent now, if you hadn't heard." "I hear a lot of things, but nothing about Arkham, about the flood. Why is that?" Swan shrugged. "You tell me. You're the one working for the government." Trish finished off her espresso and set the cup down with a clink. "The government says it was a natural disaster, an act of God, 1 in a million." "There you go. Asked and answered." Trish fixed him with a steady look. "I want to know what really happened." Swan looked away. "What makes you think I know anything? Like I said, I ain't been back in over a year. Between you and me, I haven't missed it either. Arkham is not the sort of place you go for a good time, right?" Trish fiddled with her cup. "Chauncey, how can I put this delicately? You're a cockroach. You scurry from one shadow to the next looking for crumbs." Swan snorted. "You call that delicate?" "Given what I could call you, yes. You're a scavenger, Chauncey. You hear things. So what have you heard?" "About Arkham?" "About anything," Trish said flatly. She was getting tired of Swan's ingenue act. She decided to show her teeth a bit. "The Lodge can't protect you any more, Chauncey. Sanford's in the wind, and the way I hear it, he burned whatever influence he had, saving his own hide. Staying on my good side might help keep you alive some day." Swan lit a cigarette. She noticed that his hands were trembling. "Maybe I did hear something at that," he allowed, after a moment. "I was there just last week." "So you lied?" She wasn't surprised by this. Chauncey lied like other men breathed. The only way to deal with him was to winnow the chaff from the wheat. "I obfuscated. It was a flying visit. The lodge is gone, sure, but I stashed away some bits and pieces for a rainy day. And, buddy, it was rainy that day. Arkham looked like it had been on the wrong end of a wrecking ball. Businesses, houses just gone, washed away like they were never there." Swan's gaze went vague. "They were still picking bodies out of the wreckage when I got there. I decided to get what I needed and beat feet, post-haste." He paused. "Only I wasn't the only one poking around. You ever hear the name Randall Tillinghast?" "He sounds vaguely familiar. Old money family, right? Lodge members?" Swan laughed sharply. "Not exactly. Same line of work, different company." Trish frowned. "Which one exactly?" There were a lot of secret societies haunting the fringes of her world. Spies and occultists went together like eggs and cream. She'd encountered her share of them over the years. Groups like the Red Coterie or the Thessalian Sisterhood. All of them weird, all of them bad news in their own special way. They call themselves the Pilgrims of the Drowned City. I don't suppose you've got them in that impressive mental Rolodex of yours." Swan waved her reply aside. "Never mind. I don't know much about them, and I don't care to educate myself. Ignorance is bliss, right? Especially when it comes to this sort of thing. What I do know is that Tillinghast is associated with them somehow." "And how do you know that?" "Because the guy who braced me in Arkham was looking for him." Trish was careful not to let her surprise show. "What guy was this?" Swan smiled. "A Fed named Banks." Trish paused. "Banks? Roland Banks?" Swan's smile faded. "Yeah. Friend of yours?" She frowned and squelched a sudden surge of old memories, mostly bad, and all of them a world and a lifetime away. "Not exactly. What did he want?" "Same as you. I hate to tell you this, but you're not the only terrier digging at this rat hole. Your pal Banks is on the hunt, same as you." Swan hesitated. "I lied to him, of course. I don't talk to cops, especially feds." "But you talked to me," Trish said absently. "You're not a cop." Swan looked around the cafe again. Trish wondered who or what he was looking for. If Tillinghast is involved in whatever happened to Arkham, then it's bad news. I worked for him once or twice, back before Sanford made me a better offer. Old Carl had his foibles, but Tillinghast is a whole different kettle of fish, and I mean that literally. "I'm not paying you to be cryptic, Chauncey. That's my job." "That's all I know, I swear." Swan reached across the table as if to take her hand, but stopped short. "Look, Trish, I don't like you, but I've always respected you. So know that what I'm about to say comes from a place of regard. Leave it alone. Forget Arkham. Forget Tillinghast. Find something else to get your teeth into."
"You're afraid,"
Trish said softly. Chauncey wasn't the courageous sort, but it took more to scare him this bad than some penny ante cult. Whatever he was worried about was big, and that worried her in turn. Swan rose from his seat and retrieved his boater. "Very much so. And if you had an ounce of brains, you would be too. We're small fry, Trish. We're in deep water now, and there's bigger fish swimming around out there, and they're hungry. If you're not careful, they'll swallow you whole." He tossed a few coins on the table. "Thanks for the coffee. Let's never do this again, huh?" Trish watched him sidle through the crowded cafe and vanish out the door. She had a feeling she wouldn't be seeing Chauncey again. Maybe that was for the best. The tenuous alliance between the Black Chamber and the Silver Twilight Lodge was old news. Good riddance to bad rubbish. She'd been against it from the first, and had made sure her objections were on the record. Recent events had proven her correct. Not that she expected Yardley to admit it, nor was she planning to gloat. She was still on thin ice with the bosses. Maybe Chauncey was right. Maybe she ought to lay low and let whatever storm was building blow over. She chuckled softly to herself. No, that wasn't her style. It never had been. There was a puzzle here, and she was going to solve it. Trish dropped a few sous on the table and rose. Time to find another cafe. She'd been sitting here too long, and this one didn't have a public coal box. She retrieved her coat and headed outside. But as she let the door close behind her, she felt a sudden flicker of warning. There were eyes on her, and not friendly ones either. She paused on the stoop, as if she were a tourist trying to get her bearings. Paris was full of watchers, most of them watching each other. Spies, Bolsheviks, and worse. She gave the street a surreptitious sweep, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. No one lurking in the shadows or waiting to grab her. No one obviously watching. But even so, She could feel the unseen onlookers' attentions like an itch at the base of her skull. Someone was out there. Maybe they'd been following Chauncey. Maybe it was the Russians still looking to settle scores. Or maybe it was someone or something else. Trish shivered, pulled up the collar of her coat, and hurried away from the cafe. Something told her she'd outstayed her welcome in Paris. It was time to go home. Chapter 2. New York. Commissioner Kiana Taylor sat slumped at her desk, the weight of the world on her shoulders, or so it felt of late. She leaned back and stretched, trying to work the kinks out. Above her head, a forest of pencils dotted the ceiling. So far, none of them had fallen out. She decided to take it as a good omen. "You know, the Romans used to practice a form of divination called bellomancy," she said to the young woman sitting on the opposite side of the desk. "They'd take a handful of arrows and throw them into the ground, then read the future in the resulting patterns." "Those are pencils," Lacey Osborne noted deferentially. Taylor snorted. "I am aware of that, Miss Osborne. Tell me." "Scarborough is in the wind. The Paris office of the Black Chamber, Cipher Bureau," Taylor corrected absently as she selected a pencil from the jar on her desk. "Calling them the Black Chamber makes it sound like they're warlocks." Osborne nodded and continued. "The Paris office lost contact with her, or that's what they claim, at least. From what I can tell, it's not the first time she's gone to ground on her own initiative. They seem to expect that she'll get back in contact eventually." "She's got good instincts," Taylor said. She weighed the pencil on her finger and then sent it hurtling upwards, lead first. It sank into the ceiling tile, joining the rest. "We could use some of that around here, especially these days. What about Swan?" "Piedmont and Galette are tailing him. Do you want him picked up?" "No, leave it for now. We have bigger worries than a nasty little scavenger like him." Taylor leaned back again and let her gaze roam around her small office, hidden away in the basement of the New York Public Library. As spaces went, she'd occupied worse. It was bigger than a broom closet and had access to a private washroom. A dozen such offices shared the same general space down in the library's labyrinthine basement. Only half of them were filled by Osborne and the other agents under Taylor's authority. But that was going to change, and soon. It would have to, if the Foundation wanted to have any hope of keeping a lid on the new status quo. "Where are we at on the investigation?" Osborne didn't ask for clarification. There was only one investigation going on right now. Arkham, the drowned city. She ran a hand through her hair and said, "Stalled. We've got people watching several of the individuals involved in the initial contact, but some of them have just plain vanished. Ruby Standish might be in South America somewhere." "What about the antiques dealer, Tillinghast?" Osborne frowned. "No sign of him." Taylor closed her eyes and massaged the bridge of her nose. She wasn't surprised that he was proving elusive. The Foundation weren't the only ones after him. Tillinghast had to know he was the first name on every agency's list. He was playing it smart, staying out of sight. He was probably hoping they'd forget about him, eventually. Either that, or he was laying low and planning his next move. She didn't much care for the implications of the latter possibility. Arkham had surprised everyone. 1 minute just whispers and hints, the next a full-scale disaster, the repercussions of which were still not fully understood. Floods, quakes, flocks of birds falling from the skies, strange things washing up on local beaches, or walking ashore in some cases. It was all bad news, all one big headache. The only bright spot was that now the League of Nations might loosen the purse strings a bit and give her some real funding to properly investigate para-dimensional matters, though she couldn't help but worry that it might be a matter of too little too late. "Have our people in Alexandria reported in yet?" she asked. "Not yet," Osborn said. "They're having a bit of trouble locating the, individual in question." She hesitated. "May I speak frankly, ma'am?" Taylor nodded. "Please do." Osborn looked unhappy. "It doesn't seem altogether wise to involve them in this. Given our history with the coterie, I mean. We haven't exactly been bosom chums." Taylor paused. She understood how Osborn felt. The Foundation had been focused on the coterie as public enemy number one for most of their existence. They'd lost good people going up against that particular bunch of esotericists. But things were changing. The game board had been flipped. Nobody knew what was coming down the pike, not even the coterie. She cleared her throat. "Osborn, any other time you'd be correct," she began. "But in my opinion, this is an all-hands-on-deck sort of situation. The world as we know it has changed. The old certainties aren't. A year ago, the Red Coterie was the biggest threat we could imagine. Now their help might be the difference between survival and destruction. And not just them. There are others out there that we need to contact." "Like the draft," Osborn said. "Something like that. Speaking of which, Agent Roland Banks, what's his status?" "Hudson and Antonova are keeping an eye on him and on his investigation. So far he hasn't dug up much more than we have, but he's pretty determined." "Determined is a polite way of saying stubborn as a mule," Taylor said, pleased. She had high hopes for Banks. A man like that belonged with the Foundation, whether he knew it or not. "What about his bosses?" "Not happy," Osborn said. "No, they wouldn't be." Taylor sat back and interlaced her fingers. "Let's up the pressure a bit. Toss some levers in the halls of influence. You know who to call. I want the Bureau of Investigation to find better things to do with their time. The Cipher Bureau, too. Let's remind Director Yardley that his attentions are best directed outwards for the moment." "May I ask why?" Taylor selected another pencil and studied it. "Let's call it bellowmancy, Osborn." She smiled and tossed the pencil up to join the rest. "The art of throwing a bunch of stuff up in the air and seeing what sticks." Chapter 3. Boston. Roland Banks sat quietly in the interrogation room of the Boston field office of the Bureau of Investigation and arranged a selection of photos across the tabletop. The photos had been taken over the course of the ongoing investigation into recent events and showed a variety of curious objects, among them a soapstone idol, a ritual knife, and a bronze medallion. Each of these items had been recovered from various sites of interest. All belonged to the members of a certain esoteric sect known as the Pilgrims of the Drowned City. Said members were dead, or at least presumed so, some in the recent disaster that had rippled up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States. Others had resisted arrest and been put down. A few had taken their own lives, rather than face interrogation. Banks studied the array of photos, noting little details, blood spots on the knife blade, the verdigris on the medallion, little clues adding up to a big mystery. The biggest, perhaps, of his career to date. Once the thought might have excited him. These days he just felt tired. He'd gone too many days without a good night's sleep, Too many days prowling ruined warehouses and backroom temples to abominable deities, looking for answers that stubbornly refused to be had. He adjusted the order of the photos one more time, and then sat back to wait for the prisoner to arrive. As he waited, he mentally reviewed what he knew about Max Walton, a truck driver from Kingsport. Walton had been arrested numerous times over the course of his adult life, most recently for public nudity, with half a dozen others, on St. Martin's Beach. When questioned, they claimed religious freedom. The government, being the government, had kept an eye on Walton and his fellow adherents, which was why, when they'd all of a sudden decided to skip town, people had taken notice. Walton had been picked up just before he'd made his escape. He'd clammed up immediately and had only started talking when news of the flood in Arkham had reached him. Even then, he'd refused to say much more than he wanted to talk to Roland. Roland wasn't certain how Walton had gotten his name. That was just one of many questions he intended to ask the man. Things had gotten strange in the wake of the disaster. Not just the sleeping sickness. Cults and weirdo sects were popping up everywhere, like cockroaches startled by a light going on. Most of these were harmless enough, but some were downright murderous. A group in Charleston had taken to the Battery to self-immolate with the dawn. Another bunch in Ithaca had staged a raid on a maternity ward. Thankfully, they'd been stopped by a few good Samaritans before they managed to get away. Then there was Boston. Someone had gunned down several former members of the Silver Twilight Lodge just before the water had hit Arkham. Roland, who'd tangled with the lodge before, had figured it for an internecine conflict. Only, from what he'd recently learned, the lodge was defunct. So why kill a restaurant full of former members? Roland had investigated enough mob killings to know when someone was cleaning up after themselves. There was a thread running through all of it, and his name was Randall Tillinghast. Tillinghast, an antiques dealer from Arkham, had been named in several ongoing investigations, including Boston. The man was somehow connected to each and every unusual occurrence, even if Roland wasn't sure how. Not yet, at least. Regardless, the sooner they found him, the better. That was where Walton came in. They could draw a definite line of connection between Tillinghast and Walton's bunch, the Pilgrims of the Drowned City. The door opened, and two of his fellow agents escorted in a short, dumpy, middle-aged man. As the latter was seated across from him, Roland said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Walton. I'm told you wished to speak with me." Walton swallowed nervously. "You, Banks?" Wordlessly, Roland retrieved his badge and ID and showed it to Walton. The man sighed and sagged in his chair. Roland motioned for the other two agents to leave. "What did you wish to speak with me about, Mr. Walton?" he asked again. I have information for you." "And in return?"
"You have to protect me."
Walton's eyes darted side to side with almost comical nervousness.
"They'll kill me if they find out I'm talking to the feds."
"I see. And who might they be?" Walton nodded his fingers anxiously.
You're looking for Tillinghast?"
he asked, avoiding the question. Roland noted it, but let it pass. There would be time for that later. Besides, the mention of Tillinghast told him there might be something pertinent to whatever Walton wanted to tell him. "We are, yes. Have you seen him?"
"I might have."
Roland nodded, then drew Walton's attention to the photos.
"Do you recognize any of these objects, Mr. Walton?"
As he asked the question, he heard a muffled thump from the other side of the two-way mirror that occupied the wall behind him. They had an audience. Walton glanced at the photos and then away.
"No."
A lie, and a palpably obvious one. Roland tapped the photo of the idol. Look again, please.
I told you I don't know what those are.
But you know who Randall Tillinghast is.
So?
Walton's expression was pugnacious. Roland could feel the other man closing off. Had whatever compulsion led him here ended? Or had it been the mention of Tillinghast that had done it? Was Walton that frightened of an antiques dealer from Arkham? These items were procured by Tillinghast, an antiques dealer, over the course of the last year, and sold on to a number of individuals, all belonging to the same esoteric society that you do, Mr. Walton. Or do you deny that you are a lay member of the so-called Pilgrims of the Drowned City? Walton stared at him, his eyes wide and almost starting from their sockets. His face gleamed with sweat, and there was an odd, briny smell seeping from his pores. Roland, who'd smelt that particular odor before, kept his gaze fixed on the other man. You were arrested attempting to board a tramp steamer bound for South America. May I ask why? Is Tillinghast there? Is he waiting for you and the others? Walton frowned.
You don't know anything, do you?
He asked after a moment. Roland, who didn't care for Walton's tone in the least, held up 3 fingers. I know 3 things. 1, Randall Tillinghast is somehow involved with the Pilgrims of the Drowned City. 2, your bunch seem to believe that you somehow caused the recent devastation that struck the eastern seaboard, and Massachusetts in particular. And 3, Tillinghast got out of Arkham just before it was flooded, as did many of your fellow pilgrims. You included, Mr. Walton. Once upon a time, I might have attributed that to coincidence. But these days, we can't afford to overlook anything, even something so innocuous as your travel plans.
You don't know anything,
Walton repeated. Where is Randall Tillinghast, Mr. Walton? Are you still in contact with him?
Nothing at all,
Walton murmured, as an ugly smile slid across his wide face. His lips peeled back from yellow teeth, and something about the expression reminded Roland of a barracuda. It occurred to him suddenly that interrogations could go both ways. And even as the thought crossed his mind, Walton lunged across the table for him. Walton was on his feet and over the table more quickly than Roland believed possible. The man moved with the boneless speed of an eel, and his fat hands were on Roland's throat before he could even think of going for his service weapon.
You know nothing,
Walton hissed triumphantly.
Nothing!
They fell backwards, Walton landing on top of Roland, driving the air out of his lungs. His grip tightened relentlessly. Black spots danced at the edges of Roland's vision as he fumbled for his weapon. His free hand clawed at Walton's face. The man's skin felt oily, rubbery. The door to the interrogation room slammed open and someone stepped inside. A pistol barked. Once, twice, 3 times. Walton jerked and shuddered with every crash of the weapon, and as the echoes of the last shot faded, he gave a gurgling groan, released his grip on Roland's throat, and toppled sideways. Roland scrambled to his feet and rubbed his throat. A woman stood in the doorway, a smoking pistol in her hand. She'd plugged Walton in the back 3 times, with a tight grouping that spoke to professional firearms training. "Roland," she said softly as she lowered her weapon. "Are you okay?" Roland stared at the newcomer. The last time he'd seen Trish Scarborough, she'd been boarding a ship bound for parts unknown. Or maybe parts redacted was a better way of describing it. Need to know, and he hadn't needed to know, as she'd put it. He'd understood, but that didn't mean it hadn't stung. "Trish, you—" he began. She holstered her weapon. "Saved you? Yeah, just like old times, huh?" Roland grunted noncommittally and rose to his feet, straightening his necktie as he did so. Gratitude warred with annoyance, a familiar tussle when it came to Trish.
"What are you doing here?"
"I should have thought that was obvious."
"If it was, I wouldn't have asked,"
he said. Trish crouched beside the dead man as shouts echoed from the corridor outside. Roland stepped out to intercept the oncoming agents and assured them everything was under control, though manifestly it was not. It wasn't the first time a suspect had died in his custody, but even once was one time too many as far as he was concerned. Worse, his superiors, already unhappy, were going to have questions for him. Questions he couldn't answer. He went back in and closed the door. Trish was rooting around in the dead man's pockets.
"We already searched him,"
he said pointedly. "I'm not looking for a weapon," Trish said without looking at him.
"We took everything off him,"
Roland insisted.
"Every scrap of paper, every piece of lint. Why are you here?"
Trish sat back on her heels and glanced at him. "Randall Tillinghast."
Roland frowned. "What do you know about Tillinghast?"
"You first," she said as she rose to her feet. Roland studied her. Trish looked as tired as he felt. He wondered what she'd been through to get here. He sighed.
"He's a person of interest in an ongoing investigation."
"Arkham?" she said. Roland nodded, not surprised in the least. Trish was good at knowing things, especially things she shouldn't.
"My turn. What do you know about Arkham?"
"Only what I read in the papers." Trish looked down at the dead man. "Why did he want to kill you? He must have known he wouldn't have gotten out of here alive."
Roland grimaced unhappily. "I could have asked him if you hadn't killed him."
Trish fixed him with a steady look. "I'll remember that for next time."
"What do you mean, next time?"
"I'm dealing myself in, Roland. There's a puzzle here. You know what I'm like when it comes to puzzles." Roland pinched the bridge of his nose. He felt a headache coming on. Lack of sleep, obviously. Then again, Trish and headaches were a matched pair.
"Needlessly competitive?"
Trish's gaze took on a steely glint. "Look who's talking. I came here out of courtesy, Roland. I don't need your help. Frankly, you'll probably just slow me down." There was the Trish that Roland remembered. He looked down at the dead man and then at Trish. It was obvious that she wouldn't have been allowed in the building, armed at that, without some sort of official sanction. The Cipher Bureau and the Bureau of Investigation weren't exactly on speaking terms, but they'd run cooperative investigations before. In fact, well, that was then and this was now.
"You say slow, I say thorough,"
he said.
"Where do we begin?"
Trish smiled. "Where it always begins. Arkham." Chapter 4. Arkham. Archibald Hudson stepped over a dead fish and around the slumped remains of what might once have been a hardware store, careful not to drop the coffee and sandwiches he carried. His partner saw him coming and opened the passenger door of the motor car.
"They only had cheese and pickle,"
he said apologetically as he climbed in. "I'll survive," Valeria Antonova murmured, her cool gaze fixed on the building across the street. "They haven't come out yet." The they in question were Roland Banks and Trish Scarborough, one a federal agent and the other something else. A spy, maybe. Codebreaker, definitely. Neither was in Arkham officially. Neither had the backing of their respective agencies. Yet here they were. Hudson couldn't help but admire such dogged dedication, even as he worked to undermine it. The Foundation couldn't have people pulling at these particular threads. Things were in a state of flux. The old occult hierarchies were dissolving like sandcastles at high tide. Things were changing, and not for the better, in Hudson's opinion. Everything was up in the air, and it was anybody's ball game.
"Remind me who they're talking to,"
Hudson asked as he unwrapped the wax paper around his sandwich and took a bite, careful not to get crumbs on his suit.
"Is it the reporter?"
Andrew Van Nortwick, Antonova supplied.
"Have we chatted with him yet?"
We have.
"Was he helpful?"
Not as such, Antonova said. She unwrapped her sandwich and frowned. Does this have pickle on it?
"I did say."
Antonova set the sandwich aside. I am coming to hate this town.
"Only just now?"
Hudson asked. Antonova looked at her fellow field agent. There are worse places than Arkham.
"Name one."
Dunwich. Hudson grunted.
"Yeah, at least Arkham has running water. Had, I mean."
He studied the street around them. It looked like a war zone, even in the weak half-light of the afternoon. Ruptured buildings, piles of loose bricks, dead fish, and worse. There were still dozens of people missing. It would be years before Arkham was what it had been before the flood. Before, well, that was the question, wasn't it? What exactly had happened out there in that blank space on the map? Commissioner Taylor called it a paradimensional occurrence, like it was nothing more than a bit of bad weather. A hurricane, maybe, or a wildfire. But Hudson had seen enough to know better. Something impossible had woken up and taken a leisurely stroll into town, leaving madness and death in its wake. Then, for whatever reason, it had gone away, and no one knew anything, or at least nothing they were admitting. He looked at Antonova.
"So far today, they've talked to a Coast Guard captain named Morrison, and, weirdly, a stage magician."
Drake, Antonova supplied. Osborne questioned him right after the disaster.
"And?"
Antonova shrugged. Nothing useful, though she swears he knows more about the whole business than he's letting on. Like maybe he knows more about magic than how to get a rabbit out of a hat. Hudson sighed.
"That's the problem with this town in a nutshell. There are too many people who know just enough to make trouble, and not enough to keep their noses out of certain books, starting with that geezer, Armitage, at the university library."
He was very polite.
"That's all he was."
Hudson finished his sandwich and carefully folded the wax paper and set it aside.
"The only secrets should be the ones we keep, but everyone in Arkham has something to hide. Hold on." He sat up. "What do we have here?"
What? Antonova asked.
"I saw something. Stay here. Watch my back."
Hudson climbed out of the motor car and started across the street. He'd caught a glimpse of something in the murky light. He knew that they weren't the only people shadowing Scarborough and Banks. They'd attracted the attention of some very nasty individuals, including the remaining membership of the so-called Pilgrims of the Drowned City. He and Antonova were there to watch Banks and Scarborough, but he didn't intend to let them get jumped. Not if he could help it. They deserved that much consideration, at least. Both he and Antonova were carrying the standard wards, designed to see off most common paradimensional predators. Hopefully it would be enough. He rounded the corner and stopped. His hand fell automatically to his sidearm. The man was naked, covered in mud and other, less identifiable substances. He crouched in the ruins of a storefront, hunched over something. His hair was wild, and there was a lot of it. Hudson approached him carefully. As he drew closer, he detected the unmistakable sound of eating.
"Excuse me, sir. Do you need assistance?"
The man didn't turn.
"No, thank you. I'm quite satisfied,
he growled. Something about his voice caused the hairs on the back of Hudson's neck to prickle.
Stand up and turn around, please, he said. I won't ask twice.
The man grunted in resignation and rose slowly to his feet. He looked almost emaciated, like a half-starved dog. His hands were stained an unpleasant shade of black. As he turned, Hudson caught a flash of yellow. The man's eyes were like those of an animal, as were his teeth.
"What can I do for you, officer?"
he asked politely. Hudson peered past him at what he'd clearly been gnawing on, and had to swallow a sudden rush of bile. It had scales, claws, eyes like light bulbs, now dark. He'd seen such creatures before and had hoped never to see them again.
"What are you?"
he whispered.
"Hungry."
The man looked down at his meal in obvious distaste.
"Though I am not much for fish, I admit. Dr. Verne says I must learn to broaden my horizons, however, which is why when the flood inadvertently freed me from my incarceration, I took it as a sign."
He nudged the thing's body with the toe.
"The storm washed quite a few things up, some of them nastier than others. You should be careful, sir. Arkham is no longer safe for decent folk."
"Hudson!" Hudson glanced back to see Antonova hurrying towards him. When he looked back, the nude man was gone, vanished as if he'd never been. But what was left of his meal was still there, and smelling like the catch of the day. Antonova joined him. "They've left. Looks like they're heading for the docks. We need to follow them. I think... What is that?" Her eyes widened as she caught sight of the dead thing.
"I hate Arkham,"
Hudson said. Chapter 5. Mexico City. "I haven't seen Sanford in months," Valentino Rivas said as he trimmed his cigar. "He might be dead, as far as I know. Frankly, I hope he is. I never trusted him, and I certainly didn't like him. And I've never met this... What did you say his name was?" "Tillinghast," Trish Scarborough said. "Randall Tillinghast, an antiques dealer from Arkham, Massachusetts." They sat on the stone veranda of Rivas's new home in Xochimilco, near Mexico City. The house had once belonged to some Spanish aristocrat, now long gone. The veranda overlooked one of the ancient canals that ran through the area, and an evening mist had settled on the surface of the dark water. "In case you missed it, we're not in Arkham," Rivas said lightly. "But you were," Roland Banks interjected. "In fact, you were involved in the disappearance of Mr. Joseph Meiger, among others. He was a fellow member of the Silver Twilight Lodge, wasn't he? That was big news." Trish frowned at her companion's tone, but knew Roland was just playing bad cop. A few years previous, Rivas had been involved in certain events that had gone into a redacted file, that had then been, surprise, surprise, lost. Carl Sanford had been involved, and several people had been killed. "Old news," Rivas said, though his cheerful expression darkened somewhat, "and something I prefer not to relive, if you don't mind." "We're not here to open old wounds, Mr. Rivas," Trish said smoothly, "though we would like to ask why you left Arkham so suddenly." Rivas lit his cigar. "Given recent events, I think I made the right decision, don't you?" Roland leaned forward in his chair. "It's the timing we question, Mr. Rivas." "Call me Tino. Everyone else does." "Tino," Trish said, glancing at Roland, "you know how it goes. We're just crossing T's and dotting I's. We're not accusing you of anything." They'd practiced how best to approach Rivas on the trip down. Most of the lodge's membership were either dead or had decamped for parts unknown after Sanford's disappearance. They'd questioned a number of witnesses to the disaster, as well as several individuals with ties, however faint, to Randall Tillinghast and, through him, the pilgrims of the drowned city. The Silver Twilight Lodge was an obvious point of connection. Tillinghast had been at odds with Sanford, and their spats had been nasty, for all that they had been private. When Sanford had vanished, Tillinghast had started to draw a new web of influence, with himself at the center. Some members of the lodge had thrown their loyalties to the pilgrims of the drowned city, using their influence to— well, nobody seemed to be altogether certain just what they, and by extension Tillinghast, hoped to accomplish. Rivas's name had come up in a conversation with one Erin McKay, as well as a detective named Luxley. Both claimed that Rivas might know something about Tillinghast's whereabouts. Given that he'd left Arkham only a few weeks before the flood, Trish and Roland had figured him for a good bet to have some answers. Only now it seemed that Rivas knew very little, or maybe he just had no interest in talking to a pair of strangers who'd shown up on his doorstep unannounced. She didn't blame him. They'd had little enough luck in Arkham. Someone was doing a good job at hiding Tillinghast's tracks, as well as covering up the involvement of the pilgrims of the drowned city in whatever had happened. Unfortunately for her and Roland, their superiors were only too happy to play along. Not long after they'd arrived in Mexico, she'd gotten an encrypted telegram from the new director, ordering her to cease her investigations. She'd refused. To say her new boss wasn't going to be happy was an understatement. But Trish was past the point of caring. Something was going on, and she intended to find out what, if only to prove to herself that what she feared hadn't yet come to pass. Rivas studied her and Roland through a cloud of cigar smoke. "I wish I could help, I really do. But I left all that nonsense behind in Arkham. Secret lodges and cults and witches. Not conducive to a healthy life, if you ask me."
"We agree there," Roland said. "But according to one of your former lodge brothers, we know that you met Tillinghast at least once. He was invited to a gala at Sanford's residence right before Miger's disappearance. He had an argument with Sanford about something. A real barn-burner of a set-to, from what we hear. You don't happen to know what it was about?"
Rivas was silent for a moment. Then,
"Carl cheated him, somehow. Or maybe he got caught trying to cheat Carl. Hard to tell with those two."
He sat back.
"The thing you have to understand is, well, they're loco. Crazy, you know?"
He gestured to his head.
"In a quiet sort of way, I mean. Men like that have a hole in them, and it can never be filled, not with money or love or power. The more you shovel in, the deeper the hole gets. Look around you. This is enough for me. I have a home, good food, cigars. The rest of my money goes to good works. I neither need nor want more than that. But Tillinghast, well, he'd drown the world if he thought it'd buy him even a moment's contentment."
"How poetic," a new voice intervened. "I'd have just called him a grasping fool and left it at that." Trish turned as a slim figure stepped onto the veranda, accompanied by one of Rivas's staff. "Have I come at a bad time, Tino?" Rivas didn't look at the new arrival, his attention on his cigar.
"Not at all, Thorne. I was just helping Agent Banks and Miss Scarborough with some inquiries regarding recent events. I like to do my part, you know."
The newcomer laughed. Oh, yes, you are a true Samaritan, Tino. Not like you at all, huh, Thorn? Trish said. Thorn was tall, androgynous. Their accent was English upper class. They dressed well, better than Rivas, and certainly better than Roland. She'd only met Thorn once before at a party in Budapest. She hadn't cared for them then, and really didn't like the fact that they were here now. Thorn claimed to be a member of an organization ostensibly known as the Red Coterie, or the Coterie for short. The Coterie were esoteric provocateurs, pulling strings and making deals for reasons no one had quite sussed out. Thorn wasn't as murderous as some of them, or as cryptic, but they made up for it by being annoying. Thorn gave her a smile. "I thought I recognized you, Miss Scarborough. How have you been?" "I was fine until you showed up," she said. Roland looked back and forth between them.
"Something I should know?"
"Nothing of import, Agent Banks, I assure you," Thorn said, coming over to stand behind Rivas's chair. "I was just coming over to discuss Tino's membership in our little club. As an associate member, of course." Thorn patted Rivas on the shoulder. "You see, he decided to join the winning team."
"And who would that be? The White Sox?"
Roland asked. "The coterie," Trish said. Thorn smiled. "Yes." Before Trish could respond, there was a splash from the canal below. Loud, close. Thorn looked past her, their expression puzzled. "Does anyone else smell that peculiar odor?" they murmured. "Like brine and salted cod?" Something heavy slapped down onto the railing of the veranda. A moment later, a dark shape rose up over the railing, shedding water from its monstrous form. It was a hulking nightmare thing, equal parts fish, frog, and man, mixed together into something utterly alien. Bulging eyes fixed on them, and a wide mouth split open to expose row upon row of sharp teeth. It emitted a gulping croak and bounded over the rail in a single sinuous motion. Roland went for his gun. Trish already had hers out. She fired, trying not to think too hard about the nature of her target. She'd seen such creatures before, though never up close. First in a Russian file, then later through a pair of binoculars. That had been more than close enough for her liking. Her shot took the creature in the chest, and it spun to face her, webbed claws raised, seemingly none the worse for wear. It was ignoring Roland's shots as well. It took a step towards her, and Rivas, on his feet now, snatched up his chair and broke it across the creature's back with as much force as he could muster. The thing paused, then turned to study Rivas, as if puzzled by his actions. Thorn held up a hand and spat a single word. Light, cold, bright, and sharp, bloomed in the space between the newcomer and the monster. The creature screamed and covered its bulbous eyes as if it had been struck blind. "Now! Take it now!" Thorn called out as the monstrosity clawed about it blindly. Trish and Roland emptied their weapons into the creature. Some of the shots must have hit something vital, for the thing gave a warbling cry and collapsed in a stinking heap. Roland circled the body, checking for any sign of life, his expression drawn, tight, and pale. "Is it dead?" Trish asked shakily as she reloaded her pistol.
"I have no idea,"
Roland said. He snapped his revolver shut and emptied the newly reloaded cylinder into the thing's misshapen skull.
"But I think that did it."
"Deep one bulls take a good bit of killing," Thorn said absently. They dabbed at their delicate features with a handkerchief. "Stubborn creatures. Never know when to quit. Much like yourselves," Thorn added, glancing at Trish. "I left Arkham to get away from this sort of thing," Rivas said. He looked down at the pieces of the broken chair in his hands and tossed them aside. He turned accusingly to Thorn.
You promised me that the coterie could keep this sort of thing from happening if I helped your cause.
Thorn frowned. We do our best, Mr. Rivas, but sometimes our best isn't enough, especially these days. But I don't think our Batrachian friend here was after you. Thorn fixed Trish and Roland with an unsettling gaze. Indeed, I rather suspect that it was following you two. You've annoyed someone very powerful, not to mention vindictive. Tillinghast, Trish said, looking at Roland. Thorn nodded. He's a bad influence, that one. They stuffed their handkerchief back into the pocket of their jacket. Though what he hopes to accomplish by killing you, I can't imagine. Maybe he just doesn't like you. And what about you? Trish asked. Awfully convenient, the way you showed up just now. One might think you were keeping tabs on us. Thorn gestured ambivalently. We have larger concerns than a pair of terriers like you. The world is in a delicate place, Miss Scarborough. The coterie is one of the few organizations in any position to keep it turning on its proper axis, which is exactly what we intend to do, using any and all means at our disposal. They paused. Still, one does feel a certain amount of responsibility. Meaning what? Trish asked, careful not to show her annoyance. Thorn talked at length, but said very little. Go to the Bodleian Library. Thorn produced a pale, rose-hued card from within their sleeve. You might find answers there. Ask for a fellow named Kosi Mabati. He's not a coterie member, but he is a fellow traveller, you might say. Show him this card, and he might well deign to aid you.
The Bodleian is in England, Roland said.
Oxford, to be exact, Thorn purred. Fine city, fine college. I went there myself, in my tumultuous youth. I learned quite a bit during my time there. You might as well. They paused and looked down at the dead creature on the veranda. Though I wouldn't dawdle. Fish swim in schools, after all. Where there's one, there's bound to be several. Roland looked at her, his expression neutral. He knew enough to recognize when he was out of his depth. He'd follow her lead. Trish sighed. They didn't have many options, not if they wanted to find Tillinghast. They had to follow the trail wherever it led and hope for the best. Oxford it is. Chapter 6. Alexandria. Harry Quinn sat back in her chair and watched the crowded waterfront below. The hotel was a good one, not great, but the view was exceptional. The Corniche ran along the eastern harbor of the city and was a main arterial route for traffic. It was the heartbeat of the city. A fathom bell rang out across the water, and she turned to the woman sitting in the chair next to hers. We really need to stop meeting like this. People will talk. Which people? Alessandra Zorzi asked as she lit a cigarette. She passed the latter to Quinn, who took it with a nod of thanks. Your employers in the Foundation, or merely the great unwashed? Regardless, what does it matter? To you, nothing, I suppose. To me, my career, my reputation. Quinn shook her head. I don't even know how this happened. She paused. Again. Alessandra lit a cigarette for herself. I am told that I am quite charming. Quinn laughed. I suppose that's the word for it. Alessandra frowned. That is a fine thing to say to me. How hurtful. She reclined in her seat and blew sulky rings of smoke into the air. She was beautiful, Quinn had to admit. There were worse people to do something stupid with. "And I suppose you will want to talk about work now. So tedious." "It's why I came to Alexandria," Quinn said, feeling guilty despite knowing better. Alessandra was dangerous that way. Once she got her hooks into you, it was hard to extricate yourself, even if you knew the risk. Especially if you knew the risk. "It is why we came," Alessandra corrected gently. "Speaking of us, when is your little pal coming back?" "My pal? You mean Pepper? I sent her to keep an eye out for our guest." "Good," Quinn said. "I don't want her overhearing anything she shouldn't. Loose lips, etc." She put an edge in her voice. Alessandra smiled lazily. "I tell her everything anyway, you know." "That's on you. As long as she doesn't hear it from me." Gripped by a sudden need for distance, Quinn stood and went to the edge of the balcony. It had been a strange trip. She'd met Alessandra and her Southie tag-along in Milan a week ago and offered the Foundation's proposal. Help them contact the coterie in return for fair compensation. Since then, they'd been chased by agents of the coterie in the employ of one of its more unpleasant members, encountered a rural Bacchic cult with weird ideas about public nudity, and gotten into a gunfight in Cairo. Oh, and she and Alessandra had— She clamped down firmly on the thought and pushed it aside. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were in Alexandria, waiting for a summons to meet the Claret Knight. He'd avoided all previous attempts at contact by the Foundation, not without cause, Quinn had to admit, but he was willing to meet Alessandra. Maybe she was charming at that. Quinn sighed. "The coterie is up to something." "Circling the wagons, I imagine." Alessandra blew smoke into the air. "While I am not certain what occurred recently in Arkham, it was what some might call a seismic event. The game board has been tipped over, or at least thrown into disarray." "So I hear," Quinn said. It was hard to tell what Alessandra knew at any given time. She absorbed information like a sponge. It was one of the reasons Taylor had been so desperate to make contact. The Foundation needed people like Alessandra, people who could see the patterns and weather the storms. "But what do you hear?" Alessandra peered up at her through a veil of smoke. "About what?" "Anything. Everything." "I hear about arrest, about missing poets and painters, about a nightmare shared by thousands all across the world," Alessandra said. "No one knows what's happening, or if they do, they aren't talking." "Anything less cryptic?" Quinn turned to her. "What's the coterie talking about?" "And why would I know that?" "That's why you're here, right? To talk to one of them?" Alessandra studied her for a moment and then sighed. "I am not a member of the coterie, Ari. I know members, yes, but I am not one of them, and thus not privy to the details of their correspondence." "But you're a thief, and thieves know things." "Do we?" "Fine. Let us say we do," Alessandra shrugged. "All of my peers, Ruby Standish, Arsene Renard, Chauncey Swan, another 4 or 5 whom you might even have heard of, their answer to this question will be the same as mine." "Which is?" "Nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" Alessandra's expression was unusually grim. "Because at the moment it is very dangerous. Thieves profit most in settled times, especially thieves with an interest in the sort of things your lot are interested in. Right now, every cult, every illuminated society, every sisterhood of shadows in the world is on high alert for reasons they do not fully understand, and that makes for dangerous times. "So you're cowards," Quinn said bluntly, "hiding out until it all blows over. Only it's not going to blow over, is it?" Alessandra rose gracefully from her seat and joined Quinn at the edge of the balcony. "Darling, I have faced things more terrible than you can imagine, and all in the last bloody year. But a mouse isn't cowardly for avoiding the eye of a hawk." She gently brushed a strand of hair out of Quinn's face. "Still, sometimes a mouse might risk it all. At least for the right incentive, I should say." Before Quinn could reply, there was a pointed cough from the doorway. She swallowed and turned to see Pepper Kelly lounging against the doorframe. The young woman was dressed like a man and would easily blend in with the waterfront crowd. She tipped back the brim of her flat cap and said, "If you two are finished canoodling, we've got company." "Coterie agents?" Alessandra asked. "If not, someone's horning in on their style." Pepper gave Quinn a desultory once-over. "Tuck in your shirt, princess. We're about to meet an honest-to-gosh knight." Chapter 7. Oxford.
"Why are we down here again, Mr. Mabati?"
Roland Banks asked as he and Trish Scarborough followed the man calling himself Nakosi Mabati down through the stacks of the Bodleian Library. Somewhere above them, students and faculty crossed Radcliffe Square, heading for class or home. Roland wished he was up there with them. He'd never been good with tight spaces, and the close-set, heavily laden shelves to either side of them were feeling closer with every passing moment. Mabati, leading the way, chuckled. He was a short, bald man, but broad and dressed in what Roland thought of as the uniform of an academic. Lots of tweed and a watch on a fob chain. Ritual scarification marked his round face, lending him a sinister air despite his otherwise innocuous appearance.
"Because what you are in search of is not for public consumption, Mr. Banks. Only by special permission of the head librarian can one visit the chained library, or by accompanying a fellow of the college with those privileges, such as myself. That is why Thorne sent you to me."
"I've never heard of this chained library," Trish said.
"Why would you have? Its existence is known only to those who might make use of its contents."
Mabati glanced back at them, a twinkle in his eye.
"You two don't strike me as would-be necromancers."
Roland frowned.
"Is that a joke?"
The electric lighting overhead flickered oddly, and he thought he heard someone moving books nearby. His skin prickled with unease. Mabati had assured them that they had the stacks to themselves at this time of day.
"Only if you find it funny," Mabati said. "The chained library lies below the stacks. When this area was dug out a decade ago, the builders encountered a strange abscess in the earth, a tumulus built over centuries before. Certain persons of discretion were employed to put the space to good use. They oversaw the construction of the chained library, the secret stacks of the Bodleian, sometimes called the Black Stacks by the ignorant."
"And what's in these secret stacks?" Trish asked.
"Secrets, Miss Scarborough. I should have thought that was obvious."
Mabati stopped and indicated a heavy wooden door just ahead of them.
"Here we are."
The door looked medieval to Roland. Then so did almost everything about Oxford. His feelings of unease grew. He felt like someone was peering between the shelves at them. He turned and scanned the stacks for any sign of an eavesdropper, but saw nothing save books and dust and shadows. He'd been jumpy since Mexico. The whole world felt off kilter to him these days, like he was standing on quicksand. Trish, on the other hand, seemed as calm as ever. He turned back to Mabati.
Great. Let's get what we came down here for and go.
"Are you always this impatient, Mr. Banks?" Mabati asked, as he selected an iron key from the ring he'd been carrying. "Haste breeds waste, they say."
Who says?
Roland asked. He heard a thump echo through the stacks as if someone had dropped a book. Was Mabati wrong? Was someone else down here? The thought wasn't an appealing one. What if it was a trap? Once he might have considered such a thought to be mere paranoia. These days he knew better. He and Trish were swimming upstream in this investigation. The attack in Mexico City had been a warning. Someone didn't want them looking into what happened in Arkham or Randall Tillinghast. Maybe it was Tillinghast himself covering his tracks. All he knew for certain was that they were on their own. He didn't know about Trish, but he was fairly certain he was out of a job. He'd received a cable in Mexico City asking for his resignation. He'd expected it to come sooner or later. His superiors hadn't been happy about the investigation into Tillinghast from the start. He hadn't replied yet, though he knew that he'd have to do so eventually. He wasn't certain how he felt about it. He'd given so much of his life to the Bureau, and now, for all intents and purposes, it was over. He glanced at Trish. Maybe the Cipher Bureau was hiring. She met his gaze and looked away. It was hard to tell what she was thinking at any given time. Knowing her as he did, he figured she was calculating all the angles, looking for an opening to spring a few questions on Mabati. Though he'd given them no reason to distrust him, Roland still couldn't help but feel that they were being played somehow. From what Trish had told him of Thorne and the coterie, they were a tricky bunch. If Mabati were in with them, there was no telling whether he truly intended to help them as he claimed. A creak of hinges drew his attention back to Mabati and the door. The latter swung open, and a gust of cold, dry air washed over them. Inside was a large, circular brick chamber, lined with heavy lecterns of dark wood and lit by electric sconces mounted at regular intervals. The books that occupied the lecterns bore one commonality. All were connected to the pedestals by heavy chains black with age.
"Welcome to the chained library of Oxford," Mabati said. "What you seek will be here. We simply have to find it."
As he looked around, Roland found himself wondering whether that was true. That the answers they sought about what had happened in Arkham, and was still happening, were in this dingy sub-basement seemed unlikely at best. Then everything about this case was unlikely, if not downright impossible.
"How can a bunch of worm-eaten old books tell us what happened in Arkham?"
he asked. He'd had enough experience with ugly little books like these to know that they were almost always a dead end, or worse. The world might be wilder and stranger than he'd ever conceived as a rookie agent, but some things were as certain as the tides. Mabati looked offended.
"These books contain the accumulated knowledge of cunning men, witches, and sorcerers from across the centuries, Mr. Banks. Also, they are assuredly not worm-eaten."
Trish cleared her throat. "I think what he meant to say was, where should we start?"
Mabati glanced at her. "That depends on what exactly you wish to know."
Trish looked around. "How about we start with the pilgrims of the drowned city and go from there? What can you tell us about them?"
"Here," Start with this copy of the Confessions of Clytanus. I translated it myself, Mabati said, indicating a lectern. As to what I know, if what you told me is true, they want you dead. Or, rather, Randall Tillinghast wants you dead. He shrugged. At this point, one is the same as the other. So he's a member? Roland asked, picking up another book. It was old. The cover was made of something green, greasy, and flexible that smelled like low tide. The pages were hand-cut and unevenly bound. It was written in something that looked like Latin but wasn't, and the words seemed to squirm in the dim light. Mabati gently took it from him and set it back on its lectern. Better to say the member. The founder, I believe. And how'd you come by this information? Mabati grinned. So suspicious, Mr. Banks, but understandable given the circumstances. The truth is, I, like many who share my inclinations, have kept a weather eye on the situation in Arkham. What occurred was nothing less than the first sounding of the horn of the apocalypse, and Randall Tillinghast was the one who blew it. You sound sure of that. As I said, I pay attention. Mabati indicated a second lectern. Here, Gantley's Hydrophini. Mind the illustrations, they're quite unpleasant. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. After you're done with those, I suggest we look at our copies of Gaston Lefay's Habitants des Profondeurs and Unter the Kulten, the von List translation for the latter. I think, he trailed off, his expression thoughtful. What else might be helpful? The Rolia text, Authors Unknown. I believe there's a copy here. Let me... Eh? Roland felt it too. The air was different, like just before a storm. The hairs on his arms and neck were prickling. His hand dropped to his weapon. Trish's contacts had ensured they had weapons waiting at the docks, but he'd hoped not to have to use them. It was bad enough they were here unofficially. Gunplay would only make things more difficult. "What is it?" Trish asked, still looking at the book Mabati had directed her to. "Something is coming," Mabati said unhelpfully. His expression was troubled. Roland heard the sound of a book falling from a shelf outside among the stacks. He waved for the others to stay where they were and stepped out of the chamber. Outside, the lights above the shelves were flickering oddly, and the air smelled heavily of dust. As Roland watched, more books toppled from the shelves, as if pushed by an unseen hand. In the dim light, he could see the dust motes dancing on the air. No, not dancing. Changing. The dust coalesced into something more or less man-shaped, and Roland felt his blood curdle in his veins as it slid towards him. There was a face there in the swirling cloud, but not a human one. Something else, something awful. Large, too large for the cramped space, squeezing and ballooning towards him with terrifying speed. A voice like sour thunder rattled the stacks and set the shelves to swaying crazily. Precious volumes spilled onto the walkway or whirled about like leaves caught in an updraft. Roland blinked as dust stung his eyes, and he belatedly went for his pistol. But something caught him up in a strong grip, stronger than steel, and he found himself wrenched upwards, like a recalcitrant child caught by an angry parent. He groaned as the grip tightened. Pressure built in his lungs, his sternum, his head. What might have been an eye the size of a tire rolled down to observe him, and a great, hideous mouth split in a malign idiot's grin. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then a crashing shout. A voice. Mabati's.
rang out, and the dust stilled, if only briefly. Roland fell to the floor, gasping, as the presence reared up like a startled cobra. It spoke in a rumbling gust, and the light bulbs nearest it burst in incandescent showers. Mabati stood firm. He shouted again. The words were in no language that Roland recognized, but he knew a ritual chant when he heard one. Whatever Mabati was up to, he hoped it worked fast. The dust thing looked like it was readying itself for another attack. Trish was at his side a moment later. "Are you okay?" she asked, as she helped him to his feet. "It looked like that thing was wringing you out like a bar rag."
Felt like it, too,
Roland muttered. He watched as Mabati took a step towards the dust thing. The entity retreated grudgingly. It was still making noise, but it was somehow muted. Mabati began to gesture as if shaping the air with his hands. The dust followed suit, condensing into a more stable mass. This seemed to pain the entity, because its struggles became more frantic. Roland wondered if it were trying to flee. Mabati's gestures became firmer. The dust compacted in on itself. The roaring became a squeal like that of a small animal caught in a trap. Then silence. The dust sank into invisibility. The rattling of the stacks stilled. Mabati sagged, and Roland leapt to keep him from collapsing.
"Is it gone?"
he asked. The other man gave him a tired smile and nodded.
"It is no easy thing, banishing a conjuration like that."
Roland helped him to stand. Trish picked up a fallen book and placed it on a shelf. She looked at them. "That's twice now. I get the feeling that someone doesn't want us following this trail."
"We know that," Roland said. "The question is, what do we do about it?"
Mabati mopped at the sweat on his face with a handkerchief.
"I might be able to help with that. A summoning like the one I just undid has an aftertaste, an imprint of the one who sent it. I think I might be able to locate the one who cast it."
Roland looked at him.
"Helping us might put you in the line of fire."
Mabati grinned, but there was precious little mirth in it.
"If what I suspect has come to pass, that is true of all of us, helpful or no. The world is in danger, and I would be remiss if I didn't do my part."
He gestured fluidly, and dust motes danced around his fingers. Roland felt his scalp prickle as the air took on a briny tang. Mabati's eyes blazed momentarily, as bright as torches, and he said, in a voice not totally his own,
"Kingsport, that is where he is hiding."
"Who?" Roland asked, but he already knew. Mabati looked at him.
"Randall Tillinghast."
Roland looked at Trish. "Guess we're going home," she said. Chapter 8. New York. Commissioner Kiana Taylor put the phone down with a sigh of long-awaited relief.
"Our girl did it,"
she said, looking across her desk at Archibald Hudson and Valeria Antonova.
"Ari managed to talk to the Claret Knight. The coterie have heard our proposal."
"And?"
Hudson asked, leaning forward in his chair. Taylor sat back. She'd been worried she'd made a mistake, sending Ari. Quinn was a good agent, but had trouble separating her feelings from her duties. Of course, they were going to need to talk about her relationship with the Zorzi woman, if that was what it was. That was for later.
"And they're considering it. Or so she says. That's all we can hope for, frankly. There's a lot of water rushing under that particular bridge."
She looked at Antonova.
"Where are we at on Tillinghast? Any sign of him?"
"Rumor is he was in Boston a week ago,"
Antonova said.
"Boston? Why?"
"Not a clue.
Hudson said apologetically.
We managed to scoop up some of his lackeys the Bureau of Investigations missed before we left Arkham, but they didn't have much to say. They seemed to be as in the dark as the rest of us.
Antonova spoke up.
That might be why they went after Banks in Boston. If they've been keeping tabs on the investigation, same as us, they might have thought that Banks could lead them to Tillinghast.
Not likely,
Taylor said. She leaned back and steepled her fingers, studying the arrangement of pencils stuck in the ceiling tiles above her head.
No, I think they're following standing orders. Tillinghast probably set them to covering his tracks, so that's what they're doing. It would explain the recent coastal anomalies as well.
In the weeks since the Arkham incident, more disturbances, not as severe, thankfully, had been reported up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States. Unnatural fog banks, strange sounds heard emanating from out at sea, rains of fish, and worse besides. In Patuxent, something had crawled aboard a docked fishing vessel and torn the crew apart as they made ready to go home for the night. Strange footprints belonging to no known animal had been found along the Piscataqua River after a heavy rain. A list of missing boats was tacked up on the wall behind her. Many had disappeared during the storm that preceded the Arkham incident, but some had vanished in the days since. Beside it was a list of hospitals where the victims of the so-called sleeping sickness were being cared for. Some had woken up finally, but not all, not nearly all. Taylor studied the pencils and felt, not for the first time, like it was all coming apart at the seams. The Foundation was doing what it could, but she needed more money, more manpower, the right manpower. People who wouldn't wind up in an asylum the first time they saw something with more teeth than an alligator come crawling out of some nameless nether hell. She looked at Hudson and Antonova.
What's the status on our intrepid investigators? How'd they do in England?
They're headed home, Hudson said. Seems they got a lead on Tillinghast, or they think that they do at least.
He glanced at Antonova, who picked up the thread.
Mabati, she said, in Oxford. He got in contact a few hours ago.
Taylor's eyes widened slightly. Did he now? How timely. She'd unsuccessfully tried to recruit Nkosi Mabati in the early days of the Foundation. He knew more about paradimensional matters than most, and had done his bit to keep the public safe in several notable incidents. But he wasn't a joiner. Nonetheless, he still consulted for the Foundation on a regular basis.
What did he want?
Antonova looked unhappy.
He said someone tried to walk Box and Scarborough in the Bodleian. A full-on paradimensional incursion. If he hadn't been there.
But thankfully he was, Hudson supplied. More, he traced the origin point of the incursion to Kingsport. When Banks and Scarborough decided to head home, he got hold of the Foundation office in London and let us know that they might well be walking into a trap.
Taylor rubbed the bridge of her nose in growing frustration.
And of course, knowing that, he sent them anyway. How helpful of him.
Maybe he figures we can use them to flush out Tillinghast, Hudson said.
Or maybe he didn't realize it until too late,
Antonova added. Taylor grunted.
It doesn't matter either way. We have to get to them first, if possible, and bring them in with a minimum of fuss. I don't like what I'm hearing from Washington with regards to those two.
Hudson frowned.
I'm guessing their superiors aren't happy with them?
That's an understatement, if I ever heard one, Archie. In point of fact, someone has issued a warrant for their arrest. Apparently, they've been leaking sensitive information to the wrong people. She rolled her eyes, showing what she thought of that. I'm still trying to find out who decided that was a smart idea, but until I do, they're safer here with us than out in the wild. She selected a pencil from the jar on her desk and pointed it at them. I need you two to get to Kingsport and intercept our daring duo. I don't care how you get them here, but do it.
What about Tillinghast?
Antonova asked. Taylor shook her head. I'd bet my eye teeth he's not there.
But something is,
Antonova insisted.
Maybe just a guy with a gun in a warehouse on Water Street, but maybe something worse. Tillinghast doesn't strike me as the type to worry about collateral damage. If he's conjured up something, like whatever attacked them in Mexico City.
She trailed off, but Taylor understood. They still weren't exactly certain what had happened in Mexico. Someone had done a good job of covering that particular incident up. But they knew something had happened, and she didn't want something similar happening in Kingsport, or worse, an incursion like Mabati had apparently seen off. Taylor sighed. Fine, here's what we'll do. Let them spring the trap and then save their hides if possible. A bit of gratitude might go a long way, even if we have to nudge it along. She tossed her pencil up, but didn't watch it hit the ceiling tile. For better or worse, the pattern was set. No changing it now. Whatever happened, they just had to hope for the best. Chapter 9. Kingsport. The fog was thick on Water Street. Trish Scarborough could hear the slap of water against the nearby docks and the occasional cry of a seabird, but not much else. Kingsport was quieter than she was used to. It was as if the whole town tucked itself in for the evening and left the streets to, well, whatever was still awake. People like her, or maybe something else. She thought about a cigarette and decided against it. The trip over from England had been uncomfortable. Something was wrong with the ocean. She'd noticed it before on the passage from Mexico. The water was too choppy, and the wind was too sharp for the season. The papers were full of stories of beached whales and dolphins hurling themselves onto boats as if in an effort to escape something. At Southampton, she'd seen gulls circling above the docks aimlessly and silently, uninterested in the activities of the humans below. Then, of course, there were the fish. Shoals of them were washing up all along the coast, even in Kingsport. Wherever the sea touched land, it brought the stink of dead fish. The smell was awful and omnipresent. Worse was the chance of stepping on one, which was far more likely in this fog. She shifted her feet, trying to ease the ache that came with standing in the same spot for too long, and pulled up the collar of her coat. The air felt damp, and not just from the fog. The warehouse across the street was dark. Then it would be. There were precious few deliveries these days, and even fewer at night. She reached into her pocket and felt for the vial of dust Mabati had given her before she and Roland had left Oxford. The glass vibrated gently beneath her touch. Mabati had described it as a lodestone. The vibration would grow stronger the closer they were to where they needed to be. She heard the scrape of soles on wet pavement and tensed. Her free hand fell to her sidearm.
Just me,
Roland whispered. He emerged from the fog a moment later, hands thrust deep in the pockets of his trench coat, and the brim of his fedora pulled low over his face.
Anything?
He asked.
Not a peep,
Trish murmured.
You?
There's an entrance one street over, but it's boarded up. So are the windows. We could try the roof if you were feeling athletic."
Trish shook her head.
Not particularly. You?
"My football days are behind me."
Roland glanced at her pocket.
"What's the who's it's doing? Still vibrating?"
Still vibrating,
Trish said.
So, to sum up, one way in. Convenient.
"Trap,"
Roland said.
Probably. Want to forget about it?
Roland was silent. Trish looked at him.
Roland?
"The Bureau canned me before we left Mexico."
Trish looked away.
I figured.
It wasn't unexpected. Roland's superiors clearly hadn't been happy. She felt a flush of guilt, though she knew better than to think it was her fault for involving him. Roland wasn't the sort to let a thing like this go, no matter what his superiors said. He was a terrier, and he'd chase this rat down a hole no matter how deep. It was one of the things she liked about him.
If it makes you feel any better, I don't think I'm long for the Cipher Bureau. I haven't made contact since Boston.
"So?"
Trish hesitated.
It's always a risk going quiet.
When I checked my mail drop in London, I found a coded cablegram direct from Yardley's replacement. If I didn't contact the London station, I was to consider myself out in the cold.
"And did you?"
Trish glanced at him.
No, something's off. I don't know how to explain it. It's not just Tillinghast that wants us off his back. I think there's something bigger going on.
Roland frowned.
"Bigger than what happened in Arkham?"
Trish nodded.
Remember what Mabati said about the first sounding of the horn of the apocalypse?
"I thought that was hyperbole."
So did I, but everything we've seen, not just the fish monsters and spooks made of dust, but the fish, the weather, it all adds up to some fundamental change in everything."
She shook her head.
I think we're in over our heads, and we get a bit deeper with every stop. Maybe Chauncey was right. Maybe we should back off.
"And do what?" Roland asked softly. "Forget about it? That's never been my style. A crime was committed and justice needs to be done."
He looked at the warehouse.
"But I am getting tired of running around looking for answers, when we should be looking for the guy who probably has them. If he's in there—"
That's a big if,
Trish said.
"If he's not, whoever is in there might be able to tell us where he is."
What if they're not in the talking mood?
Roland opened his coat and drew his sidearm from its holster.
"I don't really care what sort of mood they're in, frankly. I'm tired of this. I want answers. If you'd rather hang back, I won't blame you. But me, I'm going in."
Trish sighed.
Not without me, you're not. I feel bad enough about getting you involved. I don't know that I could live with myself if I got you killed, too.
Roland snorted.
"You say that like it's a certainty."
I've seen you shoot. It probably is.
Trish drew her own weapon.
Come on. If we're doing it, let's do it, before I lose my nerve.
"Never known that to happen,"
Roland said with a smile. Trish didn't meet his eyes.
First time for everything,
she said. A moment later, they were moving across the uneven street, the fog roiling in their wake. The warehouse was nothing special, old and worn frail by time. She'd done her research. It had belonged to a cannery company once, then some artist had used it as a studio. When she'd gone missing, it had fallen vacant, but that was just the official record. Someone owned it, and had paid a lot of money to make it look like they didn't. Someone like Tillinghast, maybe, or maybe not. There was only one way to find out. She let Roland take the door, noticing the odd sigil scored into the wood as he tried the handle.
"Unlocked,"
he whispered. She nodded, and he let the door swing inwards. An acrid, briny smell billowed out, and there was a faint murmur of sound from within. Voices? If so, they were speaking too low for her to hear them properly. The smell was stronger inside than out, as if the interior of the warehouse had been under water for days. Trish could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkened expanse, and the floor beneath her feet had an unpleasant give to it. She heard Roland try the light switch.
"No power,"
he said quietly. Nonetheless, his voice echoed eerily.
"Power, power, power."
The murmuring from moments ago stilled. Trish felt the hairs on the back of her neck prickle, and a small, primitive part of her brain began to scream a warning. But about what? Roland fumbled in his coat for a flashlight. She felt a brief sense of relief when the light came on. The edge of the beam caught something, a flash of eye-shine, like of a cat or another wild animal. Roland paused.
"Did you see that?"
I did,
Trish said.
I.
The echo was strange. It was like listening to a bad recording of her own voice.
"This place is drenched,"
Roland said, letting his light play across the rubbish of neglect.
"Stuff all over the walls, the floor."
I.
Roland froze. Trish looked at him.
What?
"I saw something. Rat, maybe."
He trained the beam of his flashlight on a spot. Trish squinted. There was something there, like a bulge of fungus, or... The thing unfurled with a wet, crackling sound. Something new and sinuous emerged, coiling up and up. As it did so, a convulsive tremor ran through the floor, like the boom of a passing train. In the beam of Roland's light, eyes shone in the dark, but too many and at all the wrong places. Trish could hear the sound of something sliding across the floor towards them.
Get to the door,
she said, firing at the rising fungal shape. Roland fired as well, at something she couldn't make out. I, tech, lie, tech, lie. An indistinct mass dropped from the ceiling and smashed into the floor only a few inches from her. Pustules of greenish light bloomed across its milky surface, and eyes opened in and all over its mass. Their gaze was alien and pitiless, and she felt something in her shrink back from their attentions. She did the only thing she could, and tried to take those hateful eyes out with a spray of shots from her weapon. Roland caught her arm.
"Run!"
She didn't argue. Together they ran for the door, but the thing, whatever it was in pursuit. She could hear it sloshing in their wake, and feel the tremors of its approach vibrating up through the soles of her feet. Worse, it seemed as if it were coming at them from every direction at once. A series of near misses followed, lances of shimmering matter punching down from all sides, smashing into the floor, filling the air with splinters. Eyes glared out of the darkness as unseen mouths screamed imprecations or bit savagely at the air. Trish reached the door a half-second before Roland, and he shoved her outside and down as a protean coil snatched at them. She scrambled towards the opposite side of the street as he backed away from their pursuer, shouting to keep its attention on himself. Roland emptied his weapon into the lashing nest of tendrils that filled the doorway as he fell back into the street. Trish fumbled for her own weapon as a black, oily mass oozed through the door and spread across the air like the contents of a spilled paint can. It threatened to envelop them both, then paused. Its eyes rolled this way and that, searching for something. Then Trish heard the sound of someone approaching. A light shone, piercing the fog. A moment later, a woman strode past her, towards the undulating horror.
"Stay down!"
the newcomer shouted, even as she thrust the shimmering object she carried towards the monstrosity. Light, cold and purifying, blazed forth, and the thing screamed in a guzzling deluge of voices, some of them not human. It reared up like a cancerous wave, eyes bulging in rage and perhaps fear. Trish watched as it crashed in on itself and poured back through the doorway and into the warehouse. A man stepped into view and hurried towards the broken door. He slammed it shut and used a piece of chalk from his pocket to daub something on the sagging wood. He turned to the woman.
I think that'll hold it, but we need a containment team out here and quick. That thing is at least twice the size of the one we hauled out of the water at Innsmouth last year, and twice as mean.
Tillinghast, or whoever sent it, must have riled it up good and proper before they stuffed it in there,
the woman said. The light of the thing she held, a curiously faceted stone, faded into a dull shimmer.
The Manar fragment did its job, though. Scar one for our side.
She looked down at Trish.
Still got all your arms and legs, then?
Who are you people?
Roland asked as he got to his feet. Foundation, Trish said. The newcomers looked at her appraisingly.
You know who we are?
The man asked. He sounded surprised. He bent and extended a hand to Trish as if to help her up. I know enough, Trish said, ignoring the hand as she climbed to her feet. The Foundation was barely a whisper on the line, the sort of urban legend spies told each other on dark winter nights. But the more involved she became in the business of groups like the Coterie or the Silver Twilight Lodge, the more often she heard it. And now here they were. Coincidence? She didn't think so. Regardless, they had saved both she and Roland. That bought them some grace in her book.
Then you know your only chance of surviving the night is to come with us,
the woman said, as she slid the Manar fragment into her coat pocket.
If it's not the Shoggoth, it'll be a deep one, or something worse. You two are outgunned.
The male agent looked at his companion.
I think what Agent Antonovia means is that you made a valiant effort, but maybe it's time to regroup and hear us out. Our boss has a proposal for you.
Trish looked at Roland. He didn't look happy about any of it. Then Roland was never happy about anything. But he'd follow her lead until he couldn't. She looked back at the two Foundation agents. What sort of proposal? Antonova gave her a sharp smile.
The best kind, Miss Scarborough. A job offer.
Chapter 10. Arkham. Commissioner Kiana Taylor studied the two dossiers before her. It was more for show than anything, as she'd compiled them herself. They contained everything one needed to know about Roland Banks and Trish Scarborough. The former was a decorated field agent, but there was a shadow on his career, an unspoken accusation that he'd asked the wrong questions one too many times. Scarborough was a different story, a black bag operative, acting on the margins of society, often hand in hand with the sort of people the Foundation were set against. She glanced up at the pair where they sat across from her on the other side of the desk Taylor had commandeered in the Orne Library on the Miskatonic campus. The Foundation had set up a field office in a disused part of the stacks not long before the disaster. It had mercifully escaped the worst of things, but still reeked of river water and fish. The personal effects of the agents who'd manned it sat in boxes, waiting to be turned over to their next of kin. Both had died in the disaster. Taylor hadn't known them well, but she tried to avoid looking at the boxes nonetheless. It was never easy losing people. Both banks in Scarborough had been pretty shaken up by their experience in Kingsport, and she thought it best to get them someplace secure. A deep one was one thing. A shoggoth was something else again. It had been a trap, but the sort of trap that caused a lot of collateral damage. The shoggoth wouldn't likely have stopped at 2 victims, not when its appetite had been whetted. Worse, whoever had summoned it and set it to wait had known that and not cared. Both banks in Scarborough seemed to think Randall Tillinghast was behind it, but Taylor was starting to have her doubts. Tillinghast was a schemer, but he was the type to go for the knife in the back rather than the bomb in your face. Maybe the pilgrims of the drowned city had a new leader who'd decided to do things the Innsmouth way, property damage and all. Unfortunately, there was no way to know, until they caught Tillinghast and all his surviving cronies. When she thought enough time had passed, she looked up at the two sitting across from her.
"You two have been very busy, I have to say. It's no wonder you're persona non grata with the higher-ups. The expense report alone would probably have gotten you drummed out."
"I'm sure you had nothing to do with our difficulties then," Trish said. Taylor glanced at her. Scarborough was tense and ready for a fight. In contrast, Banks looked relaxed. Then he was more comfortable with the machinery of bureaucracy.
"Not as such," Taylor said. "The Foundation has its remit, and it supersedes those of domestic agencies, even the Cipher Bureau. But that doesn't mean we get to throw our weight around."
"Not without good reason."
Was what happened to Arkham a good reason?
Roland asked softly. Taylor looked at him for a moment before answering. She had to be careful not to scare them off, or worse. It was a hard line to walk, but she needed them.
"Yes, as a matter of fact. What happened here was a horror. A paradimensional incursion unlike anything I have ever seen or read about. Something so one of a kind that the whole world stopped, just for a moment, because what was happening here was too terrible to look away from. It's the sort of thing the Foundation is supposed to stop."
"You're not very good at your job,"
Roland said in a mild tone. Taylor felt a flush of anger. She wanted to shout, to pound the desk. Instead, she took a deep breath.
"We were distracted, not to mention understaffed. Not enough agents in the field."
She shuffled the dossiers.
"Normally we catch these things in time. This time we flubbed it. I'm not making excuses. Not really. We missed the boat on this one, and as a consequence innocents suffered, and the instigators are in the wind."
"Tillinghast," Trish said. Taylor nodded.
"Among others. The problem with something like this is it sets all the roaches to scurrying. When that happens, it's hard to focus on the right one."
"What about that thing in Kingsport? Did he summon that as well?"
Roland looked uncomfortable as he said it. Unlike Scarborough, he wasn't quite used to the idea of paradimensional incursions. That would change in time. It would have to, if he was going to be any use to the Foundation.
"And what happened to it? Your people said something about a containment team?"
"You answered your own question. We contained it. You don't need to know how just yet. But rest assured we put it somewhere safe." Taylor opened the dossiers.
"You're both sterling investigators, driven, loyal, capable of independent thinking. Exactly the sort of people the Foundation can use now more than ever."
"So Agent Antonova was right. This is a job offer,"
Trish said. Taylor nodded. "It is. We need people like you, and you need us."
"How do you figure?"
Roland asked.
Because someone in the American government put out a warrant for your arrest. They say you've been selling state secrets, or at least Scarborough. Someone doesn't want you digging into the Arkham incident. Taylor sat back. If you come work for me, I can make it go away. If not, you're on your own. You're all heart, Trish said, but Taylor could see she was interested. Scarborough was a woman after her own heart. Banks looked troubled, but not disagreeable. He was the sort of man who needed the stability a badge provided. I don't have time to be nice. I have a world to save. You can either help me or spend the next few years enjoying activities in the yard at Sing Sing. It's your choice. Taylor watched as they looked at one another and then back at her. She saw from their expressions that they were in before Trish said it. Looks like you have 2 new agents, Commissioner Taylor, she said. Taylor smiled. Welcome to the Foundation. I hope you survive.
This audio recording is copyright Fantasy Flight Games 2025. All rights reserved. Produced and published by Aconyte Books. For more from the universe of Arkham Horror, visit ArkhamHorror.com. For more great audio fiction, subscribe to the Aconyte Fiction Podcast.